Hey everyone, I'm Jason, and this is your commentary on Matthew chapter 26. This chapter is all about Jesus' preparation for his death. It's a big chapter broken down into 9 sections. The first 3 sections talk about what happens before the Passover meal. We're going to see the plan to kill Jesus by the chief priests and the elders, the woman who uses perfume on Jesus, Judas, and the silver. The next 3 are during the Passover and shortly thereafter. Jesus turns the Passover into the Lord's Supper, as we now know it. He gives it new meaning. The disciples, he tells them that they're going to turn away from him. And then he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane in order to spend time with his Father before he gets arrested. The last third, we see the arrest of Jesus being taken before the Sanhedrin, and then finally, Peter denying Jesus 3 times. Jesus finished saying all these things. Then he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover feast is 2 days away. The Son of Man will be handed over to be nailed to a cross." Jesus keeps telling them exactly what's going to happen. And yet, even though he's very specific, they still don't understand. Then the chief priest met with the elders of the people. They met in the palace of Caiaphas, the high priest. They made plans to arrest Jesus secretly. They wanted to kill him. But not during the feast, they said. The people may stir up trouble. So the Passover meal was a remembrance of God's wrath, that it will pass over those who are covered by the blood of a lamb. It was supposed to be a pure and spotless lamb, and this you can find back in Exodus. Jesus was in Bethany. He was in the home of Simon, who had a skin disease. The woman came to Jesus with a special sealed jar of very expensive perfume. She poured the perfume on his head while he was at the table. When the disciples saw this, they became angry. "Why this waste?" they asked. "The perfume could have been sold at a high price. The money could have been given to poor people." Jesus was aware of this, so he said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. You will always have poor people with you, but you will not always have me. She poured the perfume on my body to prepare me to be buried. What I'm about to tell you is true. What she has done will be told anywhere this good news is preached, all over the world. It will be told in memory of her." The disciples, not all of them, but they were angry that this woman was wasting perfectly good perfume that could have been sold. Their focus wasn't on Jesus. It was on the materialistic stuff, on the money, again, rather than on glorifying Jesus in this moment. One of the 12 disciples went to the chief priests. His name was Judas Iscariot. He asked, "What will you give me if I hand Jesus over to you?" So they counted out 30 silver coins for him. From then on, Judas watched for the right time to hand Jesus over to them. If you go back to Exodus again, and this time in chapter 21, we learn that 30 pieces of silver was the cost of hurting a servant. So that was put in place a long time ago. We also see another passage in Zechariah chapter 11, verses 11 through 12, that really describe what's going to happen to the Lord, especially when Israel breaks its covenant with the Lord. It was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The disciples came to Jesus. They asked, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover meal?" He replied, "Go into the city to a certain man. Tell him, 'The teacher says, my time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" So the disciples did what Jesus had told them to do. They prepared the Passover meal. When evening came, Jesus was at the table with his 12 disciples. While they were eating, he said, "What I'm about to tell you is true. One of you will hand me over to my enemies." The disciples became very sad. One after the other, they began to say to him, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord, do you?" It's important to note here that all of the disciples who are asking this say, Surely you don't mean me, Lord." They're calling him Lord. Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will hand me over. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But how terrible it would be for the one who hands over the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Judas was the one who was going to hand him over. He said, "Surely you don't mean me, teacher, do you?" Judas does not call Jesus Lord. He calls Jesus teacher, rabbi. It's vastly different from the response of all of the other disciples. Jesus answered, "You have said so." While they were eating, Jesus took bread. He gave thanks and broke it. He handed it to his disciples and said, "Take this and eat it. This is my body." Then he took a cup. He gave thanks and handed it to them. He said, "All of you drink from it. This is my blood of the covenant. It is poured out to forgive the sins of many people. Here is what I tell you. From now on, I won't drink wine with you again until the day I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom." Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. We use this passage very often in the church whenever it comes time for communion. We like to remember that Jesus took the bread and broke it, and he took the wine. He said, "Drink, this is my body, this is my blood." And so we use it all the time, but it's rooted in the Old Testament, in the Passover meal. This is a phenomenal thing because with an understanding of Exodus and how the Passover meal worked, we can see so much more richness to this communion. One of the things to note is the bread was supposed to be the bread of deliverance. It was a reminder to the Jewish people of how God delivered them physically out of Egypt. And it's believed that the cup he took was the third cup, the cup of blessing, and how God promised to give them a new land to live in, a physical land. So when Jesus took these things, he wasn't just taking bread and wine. He was taking symbols that these people had known for centuries now and had a very specific meaning. And Jesus is taking what they knew, and now he said, "I'm fulfilling this for you." Now, he didn't mean physical deliverance and physical blessings. He meant spiritual deliverance and spiritual blessings, which is exactly what we as believers now have. Unfortunately, at the time, the disciples didn't understand that. Jesus told them, "This very night you will all turn away because of me. It is written that the Lord said, 'I will strike the shepherd down, then the sheep of the flock will be scattered.' But after I rise from the dead, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Peter replied, "All the others may turn away because of you, but I never will." "What I'm about to tell you is true," Jesus answered. "It will happen tonight. Before the rooster crows, you will say 3 times that you don't know me." But Peter said, "I may have to die with you, but I will never say I don't know you." And all the other disciples said the same thing. So they are very adamant that they're not going to deny Jesus. Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen. It hasn't been a secret. He's been stating the entire time, and they're still not getting it. And so when Jesus has been so accurate up to this point, and he says, "You're going to deny me 3 times," the audacity almost of Peter to tell Jesus that he's wrong. And of course, we'll see that Jesus isn't wrong. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. He said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him. Those were the 3 that were on the Mount of Transfiguration with him, the inner circle, if you will. He began to be sad and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sad. I feel close to death. Stay here, keep watch with me." He went a little further. Then he fell with his face to the ground. He prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, take this cup of suffering away from me. But let what you want be done, not what I want." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray, Then you won't fall into sin when you are tempted. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Jesus went away a second time. He prayed, "My Father, is it possible for this cup to be taken away? But if I must drink it, may what you want be done." Then he came back again. He found them sleeping. They couldn't keep their eyes open. So he left them and went away once more. For the third time he prayed the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples. He said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come. The Son of Man is about to be handed over to sinners. Get up, let us go. Here comes the one who is handing me over to them." This entire chapter, there is so much to it. We can go on an entire video on the Lord's Supper. And we can probably do the same thing for the Garden of Gethsemane. The garden was an olive press. That's what Gethsemane means. And the Messiah was the anointed one, typically done with olive oil. And so you see the immense amount of pressure on the Messiah, that even though Jesus is God, he's also man. His body still feels all of this pressure being put on him. And as anyone would say, if there's any way, God, please take this away from me. But his spirit always wins out in the end. As he says, "But not my will, but yours be done." While Jesus was still speaking, Judas arrived. He was one of the 12 disciples. A large crowd was with him. They were carrying swords and clubs. The chief priests and the elders of the people had sent them. Judas, who was going to hand Jesus over, had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man," he said. "Arrest him." So Judas went to Jesus at once. He said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him. Jesus replied, "Friend, do what you came to do." Then the men stepped forward. They grabbed Jesus and arrested him. At that moment, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword. He pulled it out and struck the slave of the high priest with it. He cut off the slave's ear. It doesn't mention it here, but it does mention in the Synoptic Gospels that this was Peter who did this, cutting off the ear. And Jesus actually heals the guy's ear for him. So he's not running around with one less ear. Peter is so zealous, he still doesn't get it. He still thinks the Messiah is going to be a militant Messiah. And so he tries to protect Jesus with the sword, even though Jesus said that this was his purpose for being here. Peter was not a good soldier. I doubt that he aimed specifically for the slave's ear. If you're trying to protect somebody, that's probably the last place that you're going to be trying to swing at. But Peter is just a fisherman, zealous, but just a fisherman. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him. "All who use the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I can't ask my Father for help? He would send an army of more than 70,000 angels right away. But then how would the scriptures come true? They say it must happen in this way." At that time, Jesus spoke to the crowd. "Am I leading a band of armed men against you?" he asked. "Do you have to come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courtyard teaching, and you didn't arrest me. But all this has happened so that the words of the prophets would come true." Then all the disciples left him and ran away. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest. The teachers of the law and the elders had come together there. Not too far away, Peter followed Jesus. He went right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see what would happen. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for something to use against Jesus. They wanted to put him to death, but they did not find any proof, even though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 other witnesses came forward. They said, "This fellow claimed, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God. I can build it again in 3 days.'" Then the high priest stood up. He asked Jesus, "Aren't you going to answer? What are these charges that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, I am commanding you in the name of the living God, may he judge you if you don't tell the truth. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You have said so, Jesus replied. But here's what I say to all of you. From now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes. He said, He has spoken a very evil thing against God. Why do we need any more witnesses? You have heard him say this evil thing. What do you think? He must die, they answered. Then they spit in his face. They hit him with their fists. Others slapped him. They said, Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you? They have Jesus on trial. They have no real witnesses. So even their own false witnesses don't have a strong case to judge Jesus. But when Jesus says, You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, that term is used for the Messiah, showing that he is coming in power, in glory, and in judgment. He may be there, standing in front of all of these men, trying to judge him, but it is he who will be the judge over them. Peter was sitting out in the courtyard. A female servant came to him. You also were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. But in front of all of them, Peter said he was not. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Then he went out to the gate leading into the courtyard. There another servant saw him. She said to the people, This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. Again he said he was not. With a curse he said, I don't know the man. After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter. You must be one of them, they said. The way you talk gives you away. Then Peter began to curse and said to them, I don't know the man. Right away a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said. The rooster will crow, Jesus had told him. Before it does, you will say 3 times that you don't know me. Peter went outside. He broke down and cried. This entire time, Peter thought that Jesus was going to be a militant Messiah, that he was going to come in power and overthrow the Romans and restore Israel and make everything right. He thought that up to the moment that they're in the garden, and Jesus willingly hands himself over to be taken. I firmly believe that the image of the Messiah that was in Peter's head was completely destroyed at that moment. And from then on, when he says, I don't know the man, it wasn't because he was afraid. This was the zealous man that was swinging the sword at the soldiers that were coming to take Jesus away. Peter was willing to die for who he thought Jesus was. But when he realized that he didn't actually know Jesus, that's when he denies him 3 times in a row. It's not until the rooster crows and the words of Jesus come back to him, and he realizes that he may not know who Jesus is, but Jesus knew who he was. And that's when he broke down and began to cry. So what do you do when you build your life around someone else, and then one day they no longer live up to your expectations? Judas and Peter both had in their mind an image of who they thought the Messiah was supposed to be. When Jesus didn't act as they thought, one betrayed him and the other denied him. Now imagine following someone you thought was going to set you free. He even takes the famous Passover meal, the very image of physical deliverance and physical blessing, and he says that it is fulfilled in him. Then he immediately surrenders himself without a fight, squashing all hopes of ever overthrowing the oppressors. How could a dead man possibly save us? We have to let go of who we thought Jesus was and be willing to see who he truly is. That's it for our commentary on Matthew chapter 26. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you guys next time.